Welcome to CAM Radio, an Ahead of the Curve initiative by Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas, bringing you every Friday the latest in legal and policy. Stay tuned. Enjoy listening.
Hello and a very warm welcome to everyone. A common phrase out there is that blood is thicker than water. That might indicate that familial relations are stronger than other kinds. But many may not know what the actual phrase is. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. So, what happens when blood and business mix? It is said that family offices in India have gone from 45 in 2018 to nearly 300 in 2024. That might be because there's a stronger focus on diversifying assets, succession planning, and philanthropy. But what happens when the glue that binds a family together dissolves due to changing priorities? Can these family conflicts be avoided? And really, can a family constitution be a North Star by being part legal framework and part moral compass? To break it all down, please help me welcome Radhika Gagar and Sheshvi Kadakia, partners at the private client practice at Srilamarchand Mangaldas. Radhika and Sheshvi, it's my sheer pleasure and privilege to have you at the CAM Radio. Three women and discussing family businesses and disputes. I guess it can't get more emotionally intensive than this on CAM Radio. Uh, Radhika, my first question to you really, family businesses hold great prominence in India. By some estimates, family businesses contribute more than 75% of national GDP, one of the highest percentages in the world that we are talking about. Yet, family businesses are in the news recently and perhaps time and again for other reasons. We often tend to hear about disputes amongst families in India, especially business families. According to you, Radhika, is there a greater incidence of family disputes in India?
Thanks, Rija. I think you make a very interesting point. So, family disputes have occurred in India, at least by the records, from as early as the Mahabharata, right? That is one of the earliest family disputes that all of us have read about. The discontent over property, position amongst family members has often degenerated into full blown battles. This is not new and it is not peculiar to India. One of the first references to a family settlement to resolve a family dispute in Indian courts is as early as 150 years ago, based on reported judgments of the Privy Council. So it's not new, but of course, what has changed is the stakes, the growth, the expansion of wealth, the prosperity, and the diversification that has been witnessed by India has acted as a huge catalyst for ambition, divergent aspirations, and wealth actually worthy of sacrificing familial bonds, which have likely weakened with successive generations in any case. What is also new is the coverage, the access that we have to the updates on these disputes, be it in traditional news media or social media, which just keeps us updated of how these are unfolding. And there is also a quicker recourse to legal actions and remedies as opposed to closed door and private informal mediations by family well wishers. So we know and see a lot more of them than we have before.
Thanks for that, Radhika. According to you, why do you think disputes in family businesses typically occur? Are there some common themes that keep repeating themselves or mistakes that families make?
There are definitely some common threads and triggers, Shrija, in our experience. There are a number of situations in which disputes may arise. One of the most common ones is the demise of a family member, particularly a senior family member. And at that juncture, leaving disputes about ownership, management, and succession aside, I think, like you said, they have lost a guiding and binding force. Generation 1 and generation 2 that have previously not have to work together are having to figure their interpersonal dynamic. And this brings to fore different styles and personalities, the differences in visions and goals. The most celebrated example of this is, of course, the Ambani family and what followed in the wake of Mr. Dhirubhai Ambani's demise.
That's sort of very well said and a very relevant example to illustrate this. Shashvi, I come to you now. In terms of differences in visions and goals, do you just expanding on the point which Radhika mentioned on different family members having different visions on how to run the business? Can you perhaps talk about this a little more?
Sure, Shrija. So, in like Radhika was saying, the demise of a family member is a core reason. But as you've pointed out, family members having differing visions on how to run the business also, in our experience, tends to be a huge catalyst for family disputes. And these points on which vision may differ are various. At the most fundamental level, it could be because they disagree on the values and purpose of the business. But they could also have different management styles. Although, to be honest, in some cases, these differences may actually complement each other. They may disagree on what business areas to focus or what geographies to look at. And financial matters also tends to be a very key reason. They may disagree on how to allocate capital in the business, how much leverage to take, what compensation and benefits should be given to family members and non-family members. And one of the very key reasons is succession planning or disagreement on succession planning. And just to give you an example, let's take a family which is two brothers who are joint managing directors. Both of them have children involved in the business. We have to plan for succession, but they're just absolutely unable to agree on which of their children will become the MD after them. And that could be a big reason for a dispute to arise. Interestingly, another sort of very Indian phenomena when we talk about family disputes is this informal understandings that Indian families have on ownership of the business. Now, it's very common in Indian families for asset holdings to be disproportionately held by family members, but there may be some informal understanding at the back end that these assets are to be held by family members for the benefit of all. There are various reasons for this that we won't get into, but suffice it to say that when this oral understanding is not honored, disputes may arise. And a very prominent example of this is the Hinduja family, where allegedly they had signed a letter which said everything belongs to everyone and nothing belongs to anyone. And this philosophy was later disputed by the family of the eldest brother, whose name the ownership of a very large part of the business was held. And we have seen this with other families where ownership may be held in a certain proportion, but the understanding amongst family members is that no, this is sort of a family asset or a pooled asset. But later generations may not want to honor this understanding, and that's when a dispute may arise.
That's well
Flip
put.
side,
Yes.
sorry, I was saying, Srina, that the flip side of this is equal ownership, but a disparity in the performance of the different businesses that are held by the different members. So, if a business is divided into diversified verticals and one is performing better than the other, there may be resentment by the family member who is managing the better performing business because his benefits are not commensurate with the performance of the larger group.
And should we also speak, Shrija, you started with saying that there are three women on this group. Let's also speak a little bit about that.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
traditionally, yeah, as you know, traditionally Indian business families have been male dominated. Earlier, Hindu undivided families, HUFs, which ran the family business, had only male members as co-partners. But law has changed, attitudes in society have changed. Increasingly, women are, more educated, more aware of their rights, and they are now claiming their spot on the business table and challenging traditional notions of business. And we have seen, we've been reading about these disputes where women are sort of claiming what they think is their rightful share.
This has
Absolutely.
a knock-on effect, Shashvi, on I think how the women will deal with this generational wealth. Because increasingly, as they come into this wealth, when we are witnessing the great generational wealth transfer that is being spoken about, I think women will be one of the bigger linchpins in the family drama and how the allocation of family assets takes place. And it is very important for us to recognize it and plan for it, because the considerations may be ever so slightly different going forward.
That's very, very well put. The role of women in the great sort of generational wealth family transfer that we are seeing. And I think the various articles also talking about this, especially the role of Asian women as very significant wealth creators in generations to come. I think we spent a lot of time talking about the business disputes, what could really be the problems there, what could be the differing views within the family members. What about non business disputes? Why do those occur?
Usually, those are disputes primarily on account of succession of non business assets. Common examples that we see are challenges to a will by family members regarding the family home, as that is both valuable and sentimental as an asset. The other common example is warring claims between family members and non family members who believe they are stakeholders in the asset or the wealth that has been created. Cheshwi, any others?
I mean, I can think of a couple of other examples. We've seen disputes regarding ancestral or joint family property, where one family member is claiming that the asset is personal, self acquired by them, and they have rights to dispose of it. But other family members may disagree and allege that these are ancestral or joint family properties handed down across generations. And lastly, I think matrimonial disputes and disputes on custody of children is again a very prominent theme that we're seeing. And in fact, Shrija, the Bombay High Court a couple of years ago had actually called matrimonial disputes the most bitterly fought adversarial litigation in India.
Hmm. One can imagine so. And so, Shashmi, just to sort of talk a little more on this, if there are potential disputes simmering in a family, then what should they do?
The first step, of course, is to acknowledge that there is a problem. I think psychologically, humans prefer to ignore these conflicts and just hope that they go away. But ignoring simmering disputes can actually lead to more significant issues down the line. And so it's very important to address the issue early on so that that doesn't result in further tension and conflict. And families should also recognize that as opposed to believing themselves to be impervious to destruction, they should heed learnings from experiences of other families. And one of our learnings from working with families is that most disputes occur because there is a lack of open communication in the family. Family members want to be heard, but they often feel ignored. And so it's very important to create a safe space for these open minded conversations. And through this, families can identify the root issue, because what they think is the surface disagreement may actually be a symptom of deeper unresolved issues. But let's also speak about communication when these disagreements are so emotionally fraught that it's not meaningful for the family to have direct communication, because we've seen this also, that over the years that the emotions of that relationship tends to color communication that the family has. And if this is the case, then our advice would be that if it is a business family, they should consider engaging a family business counselor or other advisor. And if the dispute is more personal, then a neutral third party can help facilitate discussions or offer impartial advice. And sometimes it can also just be therapy. Now, from these conversations, one of two outcomes will emerge. Either the family will decide that they want to continue to work and stay together, or they will decide that they are happier as a family if they stay separately, partition their assets, or do business separately. Now, if they choose the first part and they decide to stay and work together, then they should arrive at some principles and processes which will form the basis of their relationship. And this relationship can take multiple hues. It can be as family members, as co owners, as co managers of the business. And these can be recorded in a document which, in business parlance, is often referred to as a family charter or family constitution. On the other hand, if they decide on separation, then a family settlement can be drawn up and both personal and business assets can be reallocated. Now, very often in our experience, this is the third or fourth generation of a business family that looks to this path of separation, which is otherwise in family business literature known as the cousin consortium.
Very, very interesting. I think you brought about two sort of terminologies here, and I want to sort of dwell on them. One, of course, is the family charter or family constitution, and then you spoke about the cousin consortium. And I think you sort of pointed out what it really is, the third or fourth generation of business family and taking up issues about reallocating personal business assets. Talking about family constitution, I think we need to spend some time on this one, that holy grail, that sort of formal set of guidelines which sort of brings the family together, the collective interest together. Radhika, just in terms of we could have an informal understanding of what this is, but let's take these themes one by one. What really is a family constitution?
Srija, family constitution is exactly what you and Shashvi said. It is the document by which a family that has opted to stay together governs itself. What it will set out is the values, the principles, the processes that guide the governance and the management of the family in terms of what their shared wealth is, what their shared businesses are, or any other collective interests that the family has, which typically otherwise form the basis for disputes.
Mm-hmm. And what should it really contain, the family constitution?
So, just running through some of the headline items that we will cover in a family constitution as a part of a governance exercise. I think it will start with the core values and vision of the family so that there is complete alignment amongst the family members on that, right? Because that can be one big point of departure. This will have their long term vision, it will have some of the values that they hold core and identify with. The next thing it will have is the framework, the hardware. It will have the governance structure and the processes and the conditions for decision making. So it will have the guidelines on how decisions are made, who's responsible for making them, how family meetings should be held, who all can participate in those meetings. Should it be a broader family assembly or a smaller family business council? Apart from the larger framework, we will cover a wealth of ownership and management related issues, more focused on the family business. This part of a family constitution resembles a typical shareholders agreement. It will have matters relating to voting, it will have transfer restrictions on shares, what are the terms on which you can sell the family business shares that you own, and who can veto a matter. So, for it to give you a very simple example of one of the points we will put in a family constitution, is if the family has to take the decision to enter into a new line of business, while the actual implementation may happen at a corporate level. If the family wants to invest in a new line of business, given that it's a really critical matter, we will set a higher decision making threshold where all family members must come together and agree that we want to now enter, for example, the pharmaceutical business, which may be a line that the family has not pursued earlier. So, this part of the constitution resembles a shareholders' agreement. I think three other important pieces that a family constitution should contain. One is conflict resolution. Very often, families want to gloss this one over or be very vague and high level about this one particular topic on what does happen if there is a conflict while we are doing our best to prevent one. In our experience, this is actually one of the most important provisions of a family constitution, because this will decide whether the constitution and the family will succeed or fail. Here we will talk about what will be the waterfall of resolving disputes and what can be the consequences of an unresolved dispute. Also important in a family constitution, perhaps the last one which we can touch upon, is some sort of a review process. This is important because you want to strike a balance. You don't want the family constitution to be something that can be tinkered with or amended easily to just preserve the sanctity of the document. At the same time, you don't want it to be rigid and inflexible. You want it to be a document that can be revisited every few years to make sure that it still resonates with the family and reflects the values and the aspirations of the family.
Thanks for that, Radhika. This really sounds like a proper set of document, akin to like a shareholder document, and perhaps takes away the quote unquote the emotional part of what brings the family together in the first place. So, is it suitable for all families?
Srija, all families can have a family constitution, but in our experience, it works best in terms of utility for families that have multiple stakeholders, be it multiple generations or multiple businesses, because then the complexity and the exercise really brings to bear the advantages.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Shashwat, to sort of just taking the point further from what Radhika outlined in terms of what really makes a family constitution's relevance for different kind of families, what should families think about when making a constitution?
Shija, fundamentally, collaboration and more collaboration. So, Radhika and I have worked with a number of families in helping them do these governance exercises and write their family documents. We are strong believers that drafting a family constitution should be a collaborative process. What happens in some families is the patriarch may decide to put down his views in the family constitution and expect that future generations will follow. But very often, this kind of Moses' commandments approach is likely to fail. Getting everyone on board may be more time consuming, but we think it is important. Firstly, because it gets the family members in buy in. When we are all involved in creating the constitution, it ensures that everyone's perspectives and concerns are heard. And this kind of inclusiveness helps secure their commitment, and they are definitely more likely to adhere to and respect the guidelines. But it also takes into account diverse perspectives. Very often, that happens in Indian families, traditional families, is that different generations may not be heard. The women in the family may not be heard. But when they are involved in the family constitution process, then their perspective comes to the fore. And this integration of diverse perspectives will definitely lead to a more comprehensive and balanced constitution that addresses various needs and concerns. And also, this helps the family preempt any potential conflicts and misunderstandings because in a collaborative process, the various viewpoints are already heard and addressed. And what our clients have in fact told us, and this is an interesting perspective for us, is that they found the whole process of discussing and deliberating and agreeing on the terms of the constitution very enriching because it allowed them to express their views and needs, but also understand another family's members' thoughts on something that they might not have thought of. And that helped them evolve how they thought on these various things.
Radhika would
Radhika, that
echo
was
completely. So I would echo everything Shashvi said completely. In fact, she's put it very well. The only thing that I could add to that is that families, apart from looking at the present scenario that they are solving for, should also have a long term horizon and keep the family constitution fairly flexible so that the updated thinking over the years can be reflected for time to time. And in one of the recent exercises that Shashvi and I did, we encountered an excellent example of this, where at the beginning of the exercise, the family's approach was that daughters and daughters in law should not be involved in the family business. But this shifted over a period of time, and the family constitution had the enablers to reflect this change in thinking of the family. And this is what I think keeps the family document as what we refer to as a living document rather than just being something that is covered in dust and mold and has to be kept in the drawer.
Thanks for that, Radhika and Shashvi. Talking about families, if they somehow are not able to resolve a dispute after doing everything that you also outlined, maybe amicable separation may be just better. If you could just talk to us more about the family settlement you mentioned, and I think congratulations on your practice and camp for this entire Godrej family settlement, which was recently in the news. And we all know that CAM advised on this. That was essentially a very big one, a very prominent business family. And I must say the separation was extremely amicably done. There was perhaps no news or no leak of any sort of animosity. So how did that sort of come about? Take us through that.
Thank you, Shrija. A family settlement is essentially a private arrangement. And when I say private arrangement, I mean a non-court arrangement, an arrangement that doesn't involve the intervention of a court or a judge. This is when the family comes together and says, look, we have disputes, or we may have disputes, we're anticipating disputes in future. In order to avoid these disputes or to resolve what we already have as our problems, let's come together and enter into a document to settle this dispute. That document and that arrangement will very often involve reallocation of assets. So one family branch may take one asset, another family branch may take another asset. It could be assets, it could be businesses. And family branches and family members could then have ancillary promises saying, okay, you are taking XYZ business, which is involved in doing XYZ things. The other family branch will agree and say, okay, because we are taking the other business, we agree we will not compete with you on the business that you are taking. So these non-compete clauses also tend to be in these family arrangements. And the whole purpose of this is to bring together an amicable end to any existing disputes. These disputes could be even at the court level. So even if a matter is being litigated in court, family members can step outside and ask themselves if there is a way to resolve this. And if it is, they can enter into a family settlement and withdraw those court proceedings. There could also be some restructuring of personal assets. There could be a family home that could be allocated to one family, jewelry, etc., that they can sort of privately decide on.
Okay, they can privately decide on. So, what remains the legal basis of a family settlement? I mean, is there a law on this?
So, interestingly, there is no law on family settlements in India. The concept has emerged from practice and has received recognition of Indian courts, especially from a tax perspective. Courts have held that for family settlements to be valid, there must be five key ingredients. And without putting our listeners to sleep, because these are slightly technical, I'm going to run through these five different ingredients. One is that it must be bona fide, so it must be in good faith. Second is it goes without saying that it must be voluntary. It should not be induced by fraud or coercion on any family member to enter into this family settlement. A settlement may be oral or it may be written. It must involve parties who have an antecedent title, and it must be entered into to resolve present or future disputes. So either there's an existing dispute or there is a potential of a dispute, but this is a very important consideration that courts will look at to see if a family settlement is valid. And all five of these ingredients have been regarded as essential.
Okay, I think we should spend some time on family settlement because we very quickly moved from family disputes, family constitution, the concept of a family charter to family agreements now. Radhika, what are your learnings from family settlements?
I think all families want to resolve disputes, right? I mean, it's in everybody's interest to move on and focus on things that they enjoy doing. But while families often take these steps towards settling disputes, in some cases, either the settlement does not fructify or progress to a closure, and in fact, the dispute escalates as time passes, or the progress is not happening at a pace that is useful. So, to try and solve for both these, one of the things that we have found, and so this is something Shashvi also mentioned, it's a little bit of a motherhood and apple pie statement, but communication is actually key. The basis of family conflicts is usually a deterioration of the relationship due to a breakdown in healthy communication. Therefore, conflict resolution is key that is our starting point in establishing effective communication channels. And this open dialogue should be encouraged, no matter how fraught it is.
And Radhika, you make a good point on communication. I think it's also, let's spend a moment on what kind of mindset to have when entering into this communication. Because in our experience, as you know, when a family member enters into these communication channels with a facilitative mindset, that tends to be definitely more productive and efficient. Easier said than done, admittedly. But the key really is to have some sort of give and take approach without compromising on core objectives. Because what happens is if disputes remain unresolved for a long time, then family members do tend to get frustrated and this becomes counterproductive. Really, the essence is settle and settle quickly, identify non negotiable items, and drop other demands if that means an equitable distribution. And our advice, really, Shrija, is that family members should weigh the downsides of a family dispute against the upside of maintaining their demands. The downsides, as we know, are plenty. There are emotional costs, there are lost opportunity costs, there is a loss of goodwill, a loss of reputation, a loss of value, and even stakeholders lose confidence. And these are very significant downsides. If these weigh heavier than the upsides of maintaining a demand, then prudence really demands to concede and move on. Even though they may appear reasonable, but it might be just better from the perspective of a smooth and speedy resolution to let go and settle quickly. The other thing in this is that while entering into these negotiations and communications, family members should choose their advisors wisely. Now, the reason I say this is family disputes have a very complex emotional dynamic at play. Unlike, say, corporate disputes, then in family disputes, there is a relationship at stake. And it is important to facilitate this resolution in to the extent possible a non-adversarial manner so that those family relationships and ties can be maintained. And this is where clients and family members must choose advisors, trusted advisors who are experienced and skilled in dealing with family disputes. Not just any disputes, but family disputes. And in fact, if a matter is already before courts or in arbitration, it might be useful to think about getting on board somebody who's not advising on that litigation or in that arbitration so that there is no long standing baggage. Apart from legal advisors, of course, there are various different advisors that can be brought onto the table. There are valuers, mediators, family business experts, and family members should choose these wisely, build a team so that they can resolve their disputes in the most effective way possible.
Radhika, you want to add to that?
Rija, it's also important to remember that all this is playing out sort of in a legal backdrop, in the sense the context has to be a legal binding document at the end of it, which is enforceable in law and completely compliant with the complex framework that governs businesses and transactions in India. So, a settlement which addresses only the commercial aspects without considering the legal and taxation considerations for implementation will encounter roadblocks. A, so, a robust settlement must factor in the applicable legal framework as well. And we will deal with a couple of examples of commercial objective versus the challenges in implementing it. But if shares of listed companies are involved as a part of the settlement, then the securities laws need to be factored in, particularly the takeover code and insider trading regulations. Then, if certain family members are non residents, the whole exchange control regime comes into play when you want to transfer funds or securities or any other capital asset. And most importantly, tax related laws, which will, of course, apply to any settlement and transaction involving family members. Again, there are corporate governance compliances. A key one is disclosure obligations that SEBI imposes on promoters of listed companies to disclose to SEBI and all the stakeholders any arrangements that have a bearing on the control and management of the listed company. So we have to also think about the timing of that disclosure versus confidentiality. And then, of course, there are a whole host of other issues like brand, intellectual property. If you have entered into the settlement that Shashavi spoke about earlier, should there be any sort of non compete obligations on the family members if they have decided to allocate different businesses to themselves? Should there be geographies that are out of bounds? Are there common assets and services? A very common example of that is a guest house that needs to be shared or transitioned from one family branch to the other. So there are a couple of these perhaps more brass tacks related issues that creep in once we start making progress on a family settlement. And in designing that family settlement, just to add to everything that you and Sheshavi said, I think it's also important to remember that while there are learnings from other families, one size does not fit all in our experience in either a governance exercise or a settlement exercise. Every family is unique, its dynamics are unique, every family business is unique, and hence a solution that has been devised for one family may not necessarily achieve the objectives of another family. And a successful settlement, for it to work and deliver the solution that that family business has set out to achieve, it must be tailored to the nature of the family business, the family structure and its dynamics. Are there multiple generations? Are there more women? What age is sort of, the family at? What the historical practices have been? What their future vision is? Do all family members want to join the family business in the future? And do you want to give them the flexibility to actually branch out? Is one example. And of course, the legal considerations that we briefly spoke about.
Thanks for that, Radhika and Shashvi. I mean, this kind of deep understanding about families, disputes, and the point that you made that no two families or businesses are alike. So, what I'm understanding that the job of both you and Shashvi is no less than that of being a doctor, a very trusted advisor to a family business. It's almost like a legal maven, which is offering a bespoke solution or a settlement extremely tailored to the nature of the family business, structure, dynamics. So, at what stage should you be called? If there is something where you would want to advise to the families and the fraternity listen to this podcast, that what is perhaps the right kind of time to call on you?
Shrija, I would say immediately after listening to this podcast might be a good time. But seriously, there is no downside really to consulting a lawyer immediately as a family dispute simmers. And when I say that, I don't mean that the lawyer needs to be at the forefront of that dispute or sit on the negotiating table with you. Lawyers can advise from the shadows. They can help with strategy at the back end. They can help draft correspondence, minutes of meetings, heads of terms. And this is important and relevant for two reasons. One is that at the first instant, the attempt should be that the matter doesn't reach litigation. And lawyers at the back end can help with strategy on how to avoid getting to that stage. And second is that if for whatever reason it should go into litigation, you have communication that has already been vetted by your trusted advisor, like you said, your legal advisor, and therefore it sort of holds better if matters do go to court, and let's hope that they don't go to court. But what I would like to say at this point, Shija, and thank you very much for the compliment. We do think of ourselves as trusted advisors, but we are sort of honest and candid enough to admit that we can't and don't do everything. There are some things that are not within the domain of lawyers, and it's important to say this because it's important for clients to get holistic advice. There are various different nuances that are involved in family business and family business disputes, and it's important, like I said earlier, to bring a team together. Lawyers, for instance, don't advise on valuation. So you will need someone who can advise on what the value of the business is, what the value of everyone's different stake is. there will be family business advisors who can help with some of the more business related elements of disputes and what to do.
No, I think it's very good and worth its while to sort of outline what is under the prerogative of lawyers and what comes under the prerogative of business advisors and valuation advisors. It's good to make that point. That's not everything that your legal advisors can do. Till now, we have spent time on families. What really can they do when a dispute simmers? Talking about family settlement, constitution, charter. But the reality, like both you and Radhika pointed out, that the idea is to avoid this together. Families want to resolve this at every cost. So, for families who want to avoid this together, what should they do in the peacetime at the first place? Yeah, Radhika.
Nisha, if I had to sort of, put my money on one thing, I think that would be clarity. This can take many shapes and forms in terms of implementation, but it is so important to just have clarity amongst the different family members at very early stages to avoid any disputes in the future. I'll give you an example. In a large multi-generational family, it is very important for that patriarch or the matriarch to have early conversations about the next generation in terms of what they are thinking of. What this does is it sets expectations, it prepares the next generation for whatever role they have to assume at a later date. And there is absolutely no downside in having these estate and succession planning conversations early on with full buy in from the other stakeholders. Another aspect of clarity, apart from the plan of the matriarch or the patriarch for their succession plan, is clarity on ownership of assets, which is to say that the way assets are currently held by the different family members actually is reflective of their understanding on how they are to be held. To go back to the two examples that Sheshavi spoke of earlier, where either they are meant to be equal but are unequally held, or are equally held but are unequally managed in terms of who's in charge and who should be getting a disproportionate share of the returns. So again, clarity on how they are held. Yeah, I would actually pick those two as the biggest factors in trying to keep the peace.
Shaishvi, you want to add to that?
Yes, Srisha. And before I add to that, also, I just something that occurred to me in your previous question when we spoke about lawyers, and I mentioned that there are other, team members that we should bring on. The thing I want to add is that when you bring on a lawyer as your trusted advisor, very often we can act as the sort of central people to advise on this, and we can actually refer valuers and other business experts as well, so that it's not the client who's going around searching for the best advisors. uh, just to make that point, separately coming back to your question on what families can do, I think there are small, I mean, when I say small, the points are small, but the actual impact is quite large. But business related matters that families should think about, because this is not something that is commonly addressed in Indian families, or at least thought about in great detail. The first is just in terms of the intellectual property of that business. Families should go back and check whether the brand and trademarks that they have are actually in the name of the business entity and no individual. Because if they are in the name of an individual and if there is a dispute, then that could significantly impact the business of that entity itself. One prominent example of this is the Go Air dispute, and the trademarks of this airline were held by one family member's company, and there was, a well-known dispute that arose in that sense. Another thing to ensure, and again, families can go back and look at how their business is structured, is that if there is a related party or a company that is doing business with the main business entity, if it's another family entity, then no single person or family member or branch should be in ownership of that. Because if again there is a dispute, then that relationship, that contractual arrangement may go into jeopardy. And lastly, and I think one of very important thing that Indian businesses do need to think about is to ask themselves whether their business has a strong and independent non-family board and non-family leadership at CXO level that will not get swayed by interpersonal family dynamics.
Thanks for that. I think we have had such a meaningful discussion thus far. We spoke about family businesses. Why do family disputes happen, if at all? If the families really want to resolve, how they can get to family settlement, the importance of family charter or family constitution. And we also spoke about how to resolve this and at what stage to bring in your legal advisors as your most trusted advisors on the table. But the reality really is that why would one want to have conflict to begin with at all? Radhika, this podcast has been nothing less of so much of advice and good advice coming at various levels. A lot of hand holding has happened since the time we began the discussion to where we are ending it. If you were to give one parting advice, especially to family business promoters, what would that really be?
Thank you, Shrija. I think everything that you asked really brought out the best in Shashvi and me in terms of making the conversation relevant. I think to conclude, if I had to, be a little more philosophical, despite best intentions, I think conflicts are inevitable in a family, especially in a family business. In fact, some conflicts, discussion, disagreement can actually be healthy because it results in discussion, results in debate, it results in new ideas and perspectives, which lead to more informed and balanced decision making. I think there is also greater accountability when this entire democratic process is playing out. It is important to respect those differences of opinion and create very clear channels for their communication. But it is equally important to recognize when these conflicts are becoming toxic. Proactive steps must then be taken to prevent these conflicts from becoming full blown disputes, which affect the harmony and the reputation of the family. And they could also seep into the business and result in real erosion of value for all the stakeholders, not just the family. At such time, families should seek professional advice and they should seek it wisely, both in terms of competence and confidentiality. Very often, in my experience, families, despite seeing all the warning signs, will not seek that advice for fear of leakage, right? Because reputation is just so important. But if you choose your advisors wisely, along with the skills that they bring in terms of technical expertise, they will also bring the soft skills in terms of ethics, communication, confidentiality, and these are extremely important in any family business discussion. And through this process, if done correctly, families could well be able to leverage their dispute into a force for good and change, because the hallmark of a great business or family is not the ability to, I think, sidestep differences completely, but their ability to embrace that change and evolve through such differences. And I think that is what has kept them so relevant and resilient through the ages.
One insight you have learned about harmony you think all families should know about.
One insight would be that, like Radhika was saying, that it is inevitable that differences will arise in every family, whether that's a business family or a non-business family, that will happen. But the way to maintain that harmony is by recognizing that, by not treating divergent voices as irrelevant, and by keeping communication channels open so that everyone feels heard and relevant. And that really is the essence of maintaining harmony.
Radhika, the most unusual clause you have seen in a family constitution.
Well, that's a very tricky one, Srija. I mean, if not for anything else, for want of confidentiality, uh, perhaps the most amusing one, I will say, that I have read. I mean, I've tried to draft in because it was important for people to cover, was, I think, the two of them. One was the ability to have pets, in the family home and the family guest house, and the other one was on access to terrace and what all the terraces can be used for.
Okay. One advice you would give someone about handling disputes on a family WhatsApp group.
Don't do it.
Don't do it. I would, yeah, very quickly, just don't do it.
I
Okay.
mean, any dispute, honestly, even if it's your like building society WhatsApp group, I would say don't do it. This, of course, has much, much larger stakes. What you write on text is not reflective very often of what you think. It is much easier to have a conversation in person because you're less likely to say things in person than you would do in the heat of moment in a WhatsApp message.
Okay, that's supposed to be a rapid fire. And so, with 2025 already here, how would families see themselves if their fortunes are measured in both assets and affection? What could it say about the complexity of human relationships when there are financial disagreements amongst those who share the same genetic markers? Every family may have their own history, values, and aspirations. So, what are you going to leave behind? And until we see you again, goodbye and good luck. And thank you from all of us from Cam Radio.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Shrija.